up here. Perfect. Great. Just get myself all set up here. All right. So welcome everybody. It's really, really nice to see a lot of your names, I guess, is the main thing I'm seeing here, but it's nice to see a lot of familiar names joining us today. So today, this is our first of 2 sessions about funding tips for success. The reason why we run these sessions is we run them to basically support trainees who are applying for training awards or for scholarships and fellowships. You know, either name basically applies. And we're going to cover mainly today the FRQS and CIHR competitions. So today's session is really, it's a general information session to orient you towards the different expectations in the different competitions for CIHR or FRQS. On Friday's session, which you would have already gotten the information for, and I'll mention it again during our session today, we're going to talk more specifically about one of the criteria in the FRQS award applications that's brand new this year. And as I mentioned, we're recording this session, so you know, you'll have a copy of this afterwards, and we can also share the slides with you. On the call today, so myself, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Emily Bell, and I'm Associate Director of the Desjardins Centre for Advanced Training. And our program, the Desjardins Centre for Advanced Training, or DCAT, is a professional and career development program centered around trainees in the life sciences, so graduate and postdoctoral trainees. And Christina, you've already heard from, so you're already familiar with Christina. Christina is our DCAT coordinator. And if you have questions about registration for Friday's session, for instance, as well, or questions about the recording, that kind of thing, you might follow up with Christina after today's session. But you will get a copy of the recording. So I should say that you don't need to follow up with her if you haven't gotten it right away. We will be sending a copy of the recording for your review as soon as it has time to process. Okay, perfect. So the goals of today's session. Really, we have 3 goals, or that's what we've predetermined. You know, the first and main goal here is to give you information, the information that we think is really pertinent and important to kind of orient you towards what's going to be required of you in these applications. We're also here to answer questions or endeavor to answer questions that you may have. And I know there's always a lot of individual questions about specific situations. We'll do our best to try to answer those and provide you with some resources. So some ideas about where to look for information, as well as, you know, where to, I guess, go next if you're still thinking that you may be able to perfect that, that application a little bit more. Now, I'm curious if, you know, if there's something really specific that you're looking to get out of this session and you don't know if it'll fall into those 3, you're welcome to put that into the chat box, and you know, I'll have a look and glance and see if we can't make sure that we also meet that objective. And you're also welcome to just message me privately in the chat if there's, again, something really specific that you're looking to get out of today's session and you're just not sure yet whether we'll do it. A little bit about me and my experience with these kinds of awards. So definitely, I've been in your place, whether you're a master's or doctoral or postdoctoral trainee, I've been there. I've been on your end applying for these awards. So I do know that they take a lot of time and there can be a lot of anxiety because there is a lot on the line, right? And so I do understand, you know, that they're complex and they take a lot of time and we need to sort of work through them. And that's why I think this session can be helpful. At the same time, I've had the fortunate opportunity to be on the other side as well. So to be a reviewer in the Canada Graduate Scholarship Competition one year. And this was really eye-opening for me to go onto the other side and see student applications. Because one of the things that I realized was that as a trainee, as an applicant, we tend to pay a lot of attention to the online form and the application instructions, because obviously that's what tells us what we need to prepare. But at the same time, we have to keep our sense towards what are the reviewers being tasked to do in looking at these applications? And the reviewers, in fact, are looking at a reviewer's grid, and they're looking for specific elements or specific hints of a candidate's sort of success in different areas on which to grade them or mark them. And these two things don't always, I think, go together. So as an applicant, we have to kind of stay cognizant of what is happening on the reviewer side of things, okay? That'll help us to improve our applications. So I would like to, I know some of you put it into the chat, but others have joined us. So I would like to launch a quick poll and have you tell us a little bit more about yourself so that we know, what program you're in, whether this is your first time applying to a training award, and which of these competitions you might be applying to. Christina, quick question. Do you see the poll on my screen through the box? No.
I see it on my screen.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just because it's overlaid on my presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Zoom knows to filter that out. Perfect, okay. Got 75%, 80% of people. Okay, good response rate, everybody. Okay, wonderful. I'll give it, see if we can get to 90%. Oh, it stalled out at 88. Okay, so we'll end it there. Perfect. All right, so let's just have a look at the results then. So we have a pretty even split between master's and PhD students. Great. Always a fewer postdoctoral fellows, but that's because there's fewer postdoctoral fellows, but we'll cover those competitions as well. We have a good amount of people who have applied and another sort of half that have applied already to these competitions. And great, okay, so I'm seeing that a lot of you are applying to the Fonds de Recherche du Québec Santé training awards. I should have shared, there's so many steps to sharing these polls. Now you can see the poll results, but there's many of you applying to the FRQS awards, so that's perfect. That helps me, I'll put more emphasis on that then, and that also tells me that Friday's session is gonna be really important for those who are applying to FRQS sessions. I'm just gonna check quickly because I do see some questions in the chat. Yes, questions about whether you can apply to both CIHR and FRQS. Absolutely, you can apply to both. Sorry if you couldn't select that on the sheet. I should have made it a multiple choice. You should have been able to select more than one. It may have been a single choice. Yes, you can apply, of course, to both CIHR and FRQS. Typically, that would be what students do. And there may be a provision such that if you were to be awarded both FRQS and CIHR, you typically would decline one of those awards, okay, in the same year. And that again, that's another question that's coming up is about if I already have a scholarship, can I apply? So there you have to look like in detail at the eligibility about whether you can hold multiple scholarships. Frequently, you will be able to hold the scholarship that's of greater value and you forfeit the scholarship of lesser value. Those are some great questions that came up just with that one poll. Perfect, great. Okay, so applications. So the two general sets of awards that we're going to talk about today are the FRQS and the CIHR awards. So the Canadian Institutes of Health Research is the federal funding agency in Canada for health research. And the Fonds de Recherche du Québec Santé is the provincial funding agency for health research. So if you're doing your research in Quebec, that would reason that you may want to think about applying or your eligibility for applying to awards at the provincial level as well as at the federal level. Starting at the bottom, we have the FRQS Master's, Doctoral, Postdoctoral Training Awards. That's their names. So we have different awards for master's level, doctoral level, and postdoctoral level. Moving up to the CIHR awards, I'm focusing on the three basically, awards that most of our students or trainees are thinking about at this time of year specifically. There are other CIHR awards that you may have to be nominated for, but these are sort of the main ones that students would be thinking about at this time of year. And they include the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, the Master's Canada Graduate Scholarship, and the CIHR Postdoctoral Fellowships. I'm going to refer to those. You can see that some of them have other names. I'll always be calling them the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship or the Master's Canada Graduate Scholarship. You can see in the middle, we have the amount of the award. And so that's what I was saying. You know, if you apply to multiple scholarships and the awards are of different amounts, then typically you forfeit, for instance, a lower amount scholarship in order to take up the scholarship of a higher amount. Part of the reason why FRQS and CIHR scholarships and fellowships are so competitive and so sought after is they do tend to be the larger awards in that they are typically full stipend awards, okay? Now, in terms of deadline, you'll see that the FRQS has a deadline for all of their awards on October 5th. This is extremely handy, and it allows us to convey a very clear message that these are due in 2 weeks from today. So if you haven't gotten started yet, there's still time. There aren't that many pieces for the FRQS that you need to kind of request too far in advance, but don't hesitate and start to get started right away. For the CIHR awards, the deadlines can vary a bit more. So both the doctoral and the master's competitions, if you're applying to these awards and you don't know that you have not heard from your graduate program about the deadline, you should contact your graduate program, you know, soon. The reason for that is that for both of those competitions, you're going to submit your application first to McGill, and then McGill will submit it to the federal funding agency if they deem that it's competitive enough. So there's this pre-evaluation that happens at McGill. It doesn't change anything in terms of how you prepare your application, but your application basically takes like a side road and stops at McGill before it's released to the national competition. And that means that there are internal deadlines for those competitions. The master's competition is typically around early December, and the doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship competition may be as early as October 1st in your graduate program or unit. So it's important to get that moving very quickly if that's an application that you're going to complete. For CIHR postdoctoral fellowships, the deadline is October 6th. However, one of the first things that you should do is make sure that there is no institutional, again, deadline for that award. And I'll mention how you can make sure that that's the case when we get to the online application piece. Perfect. So I do see some, yes, perfect. I see some questions. I'm going to get to specific questions about sort of what goes into an application, what goes into a strong application as we get a little bit further along. And, you know, for those that have already applied, just, you know, bear with us because we do have half of our group today that hasn't applied to any of these awards ever. So we do need to give a little bit of background on the general awards. So eligibility, before you apply, eligibility is important, and your questions about holding other scholarships is, I think, is important, a part of eligibility. The other important piece comes down to your status. So if you're a Canadian or permanent resident, you're eligible to apply to any of these competitions. And of course, you apply to the competition that's aligned with your program. So the master's competition if you're a master's student, the doctoral competition if you're a doctoral student. However, if you're applying for the FRQS, you need to show a Quebec residency. And we'll show you what that means or what that can look like in a minute. So that's particularly important for Canadian or permanent residents who were living outside of Quebec until maybe recently, until their graduate work. For international students or international trainees, you are eligible for the fellowship programs because there are fellowship programs, of course, to recruit trainees from other countries who want to do their postdoctoral work in Canada and in Quebec. And for doctoral and master's students, you are eligible for the FRQS awards. Again, you'll have to prove a Quebec residency in order to apply for those awards. Things that I did not put on the list of awards that we're going to cover today. there are lots of other kinds of awards that we're not going to cover today. There may be internal awards within your faculty of medicine at McGill. There may be special competitions. I saw that we had lots of neuroscience students. So there may be special competitions for scholarships and fellowships in, for instance, healthy brains and healthy lives. There may be other competitions for which you have to be nominated. And there may be scholarships and fellowships available from foundations. So if you're someone who's willing to share some of the places that you've previously applied or even won funding that you might want to make other students or trainees aware of, maybe new trainees want to hear if you've been funded by other kinds of awards, feel free to put those into the chat. I'd really, love to hear about other opportunities that trainees have found to get funding. I'm going to keep my eye on the chat just in case anyone puts anything in there. So, Quebec residency requirement. If you're applying to the FRQS, you must at the time of submitting your award application either submit a Medicare card that proves a Medicare card from Quebec or MQ card that proves your Quebec residency, or if you're a graduate student, you'll submit a proof of enrollment that you have been enrolled in a Quebec university for 2 of the last 3 semesters. And if you're a postdoctoral, if you're a postdoc training award applicant, you have to prove that you've been living in Quebec for 6 of the last 7 months. So those are the Quebec residency requirements for the FRQS. And that's like a key piece of eligibility that you should keep your eye on. There are other kinds of pieces to the eligibility. And unfortunately, there's just too many that are very specific and going to apply to specific individuals for me to go over all of them. I want to highlight a couple of things that you want to be aware of and look for in the application instructions or eligibility instructions. One is that there may be a limit or an eligibility criteria on the length of time you've been in your program. Either you may not have been able to be in your program too long, or you may have to be in your program already a certain amount of time before you're eligible to apply. So there may be a window in which you're eligible to apply. The other key piece is that if you are someone who holds a professional degree, so you may hold a dentistry degree, you may hold a physiotherapy, occupational therapy, nutrition degree, you must apply, for instance, for the FRQS for the professional degree master's or doctoral competition. There's a question about whether the last 3 semesters include the summer semester. I believe so. You mean because it'd be fall, so yeah, so you would have to be, the last 2 out of 3. So that would include fall would be included in that. So the last 2 out of 3, yeah. Perfect. Fall, yeah, so it's at the time of submission. So submission is October. So yeah, for the previous 3 semesters that you would have done 2 out of 3. Perfect. So as I mentioned, as an applicant, we sort of often dive headfirst into the application. But I want to just remind you that the application instructions likely appear on another page, and it's not just the online forms. And so a reminder to try to read through the application instructions as well before you jump into the online forms. That will also give you a heads up on some elements that may have to be completed ahead of deadlines. And that includes, for instance, sponsors assessments, or whether there are institutional deadlines, or for instance, if you have to request transcripts. Great, thanks Clara for sharing a funding opportunity for women. Wonderful. I wanted to open your link, but I didn't want to just get too distracted. Thank you, that's great. So the main application components that we're going to talk about are the following. We're going to talk about the online application, the Canadian Common CV, and then we're going to spend most of our time going over some key elements that you'll have to write. And this has changed a bit over this year. If people have applied in previous years, you might notice that especially for FRQS, there have been some changes. That's another reason to really get yourself back to the application instructions, because from one year to another, there's no guarantee things stay the same. What I'm not going to talk about in too much detail, again, because there's a lot of specific things that apply to each competition, is this other category. So there may be competitions that you need to attach transcripts for. There may be competitions, as I mentioned, that you have to prove residency for. There may be other specific forms that you have to attach to prove your eligibility. And you may need to ask for sponsors assessments in advance. The only competitions that require sponsors or reference assessments are the CIHR competitions, okay? So that's to keep in mind. Let's just dive in then to the online applications. So the online application, this is just a screenshot of my account in ResearchNet. Online applications are basically the portal by which you're going to submit your application. It's going to be the place that you gather all the information. You may be attaching it as PDFs, or you may be filling in forms. I probably don't need to tell this group that, but these are online forms. They're not infallible. So always keeping some kind of a version of elements that you've inputted into that online form, so that if it happens to get lost online, you can go back to it. Will save you a lot of time and effort. I don't know how many times I had to redo and rewrite pieces of online applications when I was doing these kinds of award applications, because things got lost or didn't get saved properly. That was like pre-good cloud internet. So maybe things are a bit better now. Generally, these online applications will flag things that are incomplete, so that'll prevent you from submitting if you haven't completed elements. So keep your eye out for things like green check marks or green flags. Are the forms editable? So it really depends. It depends on what competition and what they're asking you to do, whether they're asking you to actually just write into a box, a text box. And I assume you're asking, like, can you format it as well? It might be possible. It really depends. In some of the competitions, they'll be asking you to upload a document, in which case you would be more able to lay it out in the way that you want, with bolds, for instance, or underlines, that kind of thing. I hope I'm sort of answering that question about whether the forms are editable. So this is an example of the online form for two of the awards. So the Doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship and the CIHR Postdoctoral Fellowship both use this ResearchNet portal. It's the CIHR portal, and it's totally going to be linked in the application instructions. Quickly about those two competitions, if you're applying to them. I mentioned earlier I would say something about institutional deadlines. One of the first things you should do when you've gotten access to this ResearchNet portal is you need to indicate who the institution to be paid is if you get the award. The reason why I'm saying to do that quickly and not wait till the end is because if your institution has an institutional deadline that's earlier, that will trigger that institutional deadline to appear right at the top. So you can actually see that little star yellow line. That's an institutional deadline for instance, whatever this competition was. So for the doctoral competition, yes, great question, Jen. So your institution for your doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, you should list McGill as your institution paid. That might be different than the institution where your research is going to be completed, which is a separate pull down menu later in the application. Jen, I'd be curious to hear maybe what institution you couldn't find. So the reason why the doctoral students should submit, even if you're at the research institute, for instance, of the MUHC, you should submit your application institute paid as McGill because they need to be triaged at McGill before. Okay. I'm maybe going to follow up with you about this question because I'll look into see what happens if your institution is not listed on that. Okay. So remind me, maybe Christina, can you remind me to follow up on that question? Thank you. Same with postdocs. So for postdoc, you know, what you might find in the pull down menu for institution paid, you will find, for instance, the McGill University, as well as the Research Institute of the MUHC. In the case of postdocs, you'll want to ask your supervisor basically, who do they want as an institution paid? Because in this case, there's no pre-selection at the institutional level. So, you know, your application regardless goes on. However, make sure that there's no institutional deadline set, whoever you choose, okay? That's just really important, or you'll sort of, you know, need to bail out and choose, you know, you won't have the choice to submit if you miss the institutional deadline. For the FRQS awards, the online application is called eForm, and it also is an online portal that's accessed through your eligibility, through your application instructions very easily, okay? For the master's, it's a totally different platform. Again, when you go to the application instructions for the master's competition, you'll end up falling upon what happens to be the NSERC research portal. Sometimes things are just more complicated, right, than they need to be, but that's the portal that you'll use. So it's a different portal than ResearchNet. The second thing I need to kind of orient you towards, if you aren't already familiar with it, is the Canadian Common CV. For some of the competitions, but not all, you will need to prepare a Canadian Common CV. You prepare that in this portal, the Canadian Common CV portal, where you're going to enter essentially information from your CV so that it can become harmonized and everybody's CVs essentially look the same and have all the information that the funding agency is really interested in reviewing on it. For those that have applied to the FRQS awards in the past, new this year, for master's and doctoral students applying to the FRQS, you do not need to prepare a Canadian Common CV, which I think is like a little bit of a victory, unless you're applying to CIHR competitions, which require it. So these are the competitions that require it. The only FRQS competition that does require it is the postdoctoral competition. So for the CIHR competitions, you'll have to prepare a Canadian Common CV. That's an expectation. And for the FRQS postdoc training award, you'll have to submit one. What are some of the sections that are particularly important? So there's an education section that you'll want to fill out. Let me just do an aside actually quickly. So, you know, the Canadian Common CV, it seems like sometimes when you're doing it, it's a bit of an exercise of just moving things over from your CV to another platform. But again, I want you to keep in mind that we're going to look at what the criteria are, but for reviewers, this is where a lot of information is about you as a candidate, okay? About you, the scholarships, the awards, the potential other work experiences you've had in labs, as well as, you know, extracurricular activities and your contributions in terms of academic contributions, scientific contributions. This is a big place where they can get that information about you. So filling out your Canadian Common CV in a very detailed, thorough way is very important, even though I know sometimes it does seem like just a transposing exercise. So your education section, you need to fill out thoroughly, obviously. The recognition section, and I'm going to come back to that. There's always a lot of questions about what goes in which section. Your employment section, and that can be academic work as well as non-academic work. Your research funding history. There's a section for activities, which encompasses both academic and non-academic type of activities, whether you've been involved in knowledge translation activities, community involvement activities, volunteer work. There's place here for you to explain about what those kinds of activities are. Thanks for answering that question. Yes, master's students for the first time this year, they do not have to submit a Canadian Common CV for the FRQS. Perfect. And the last really important section in your Common CV is contributions. So this is where you'll be adding in all of the posters, presentations, any scientific products that you have so far participated in. And you'll give details, and it's all fillable form in terms of giving the details about who the co-authors were, what's the stage of the publication or presentation is, where you presented it, for instance. I said I would return to the recognitions and the research funding history section. The only FRQS awards that need to submit this Common CV is the postdocs. The way that FRQS likes it is they like for your scholarships and fellowships to be put under your research funding history, and any honors and distinctions to be put in the recognition section. That is in contradiction to how CIHR prefers it, where CIHR wants your honors and distinctions and scholarships and fellowships in the recognition section. The only thing they would put in the research funding history is if you were a co-investigator, for instance, on a grant. Okay, so that's something just to keep in mind if you're applying for FRQS, that it's a little bit different. You may have to open up and close some fields on your Canadian Common CV. I want to take a little quick pause there and see if there are any other questions that I haven't answered yet on these pieces. The next piece to come. Thank you. Nice. You know that there's actual emojis now in the chat box there. So the next section, what I'm going to cover are the written elements, which really are the pieces that probably are going to take a good deal of your time and energy. Great question. Do doctoral students applying for FRQS need to submit a detailed contribution file? That's a perfect entrance to this piece. So I'm going to explain that right here. Absolutely. Okay. So when we talk about the things that you're going to have to prepare, I'm going to go quickly over the CIHR because I don't think there's as many of you that are applying to that competition. The master's competition, you'll need to prepare an outline of your proposed research. In your doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, you'll have to also prepare a research project summary, but you'll in addition have to prepare a training expectation section, and you'll prepare a publication list. So that's for the CIHR competition. The publication list is essentially a complement to your Canadian Common CV, and it's going to detail out all of the contributions that you've made in a more detailed fashion. What they want to know is what % did you contribute to each of these products that, that you reported in your Canadian Common CV, okay? So that's an important section, and there's also a place on that section is going to allow you to explain if there have been any delays or anything that's inhibited your factor to publish as effectively, potentially, as your peers. So for instance, if you have been very delayed, for instance, by COVID, then by COVID, you know, impacting your entrance or your access to lab work, that kind of thing, you could explain that in this section, okay? The postdoctoral fellowship application has a similar section. It's called the additional CCV information, but it's basically to get the same information, okay, about like your contribution to each specific publication. And they'll detail for you exactly how they want that document laid out as well. You'll also submit a research project description and a training expectations section. But what's new here is you'll be submitting a research training environment justification as part of your postdoc fellowship application. Okay, I haven't forgotten this question about whether you need to submit an additional contributions for the FRQS. Yes, questions about, so if you're a Canadian Quebec resident applying to do graduate work, outside of Canada, you may be eligible to apply to FRQS. You know, it really like depends on what your application is, where you're going, and why you've laid out that program. It's about the whole application that's being considered here. Okay, I think some of these are going to get answered as I go, so I'm going to continue. Perfect, yes, thanks. And thanks for those that are maybe a bit more senior, have gone through this process before, or have the documents, application instructions open on their computer at the same time, who are sharing some advice and some specifications to answer some people's questions. So for the FRQS, and this is, you know, I want to focus on this because this has changed a lot, okay? You're going to be asked to submit a description of your research project. That's not different, okay? But you're now being asked to submit something called an integrated presentation of your journey, and that's 1 page, and a social mobilization section, that's another page, okay? You're going to submit something called pertinent experiences and scientific achievement in 2 page, and I'll tell you what that is. And for postdocs, you also need to submit a justification of the host environment, and you'll have to submit a detailed contributions attachment similar to in the CIHR competition to show your contributions in a more detailed fashion and your % contribution to all of these. So I wanted to just launch a quick poll. How do we get to the next one? Okay. So see if anything that I said just now, like, I know it's a lot of information. So if you're applying to an FRQS graduate training award, either master's or PhD, you'll need to prepare which of these? Great. Give me a chance to grab some water while everyone pours their answers in. Okay, got a big participation. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so if you're applying to an FRQS graduate award, you'll need to prepare, and I know that slide, it's not up there anymore, so let's just go over it. You will need to prepare an integrated description of your journey, a description of social mobilization activities, a research project description, and a description of your pertinent research experiences and achievements. You won't have to prepare or submit reference letters for the FRQS or a training expectation section. Great. So what are each of these elements that you're going to have to write, and what is the goal of them? So the first is the project description, the outline of your proposed project, or the research project summary. You'll have to write something that's called one of these things for all of these competitions, and it'll either be 1 or 2 pages, okay? What you're trying to do here is describe your research project. For somebody who may not be specifically in your scientific field, but is a scientist, okay? You'll want to use scientific language, describe your hypothesis, your detailed research plan. You want to underline the significance or importance of your research, as well as your role in the research, okay? And that's important because this is your scholarship or fellowship application. It's not, you know, a page pulled from your supervisor's grant. And you do need to show the reviewers what your role is and look like you have some ownership over how this project is going to roll out. And so reviewers are really looking for this. They're looking for your project being a right balance of being interesting, creative, intellectually challenging, but also being feasible and being significant in terms of what it's trying to achieve or having an impact. For the FRQS, they're also looking within your research project for evidence that you've considered the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not going to speak about that today because Friday we're going to talk only about this social mobilization section and how you would address the UN Sustainable Development Goals in different parts of your application. The training expectations. So this is only for those doing the CIHR doctoral or postdoctoral competitions. This is 2 pages at your discretion to describe your professional, academic, extracurricular experiences, how they're going to contribute to training success. So this should be definitely forward-looking about what this program that you're enrolling in or that you're in currently is going to look like, how it's going to build your professional skill set, how it's going to both build that through potentially your academic program, but also other things that you're going to do or be involved in, and how those are going to contribute to your career plan and to your career planning. So how are you even going to go about evaluating yourself every year and doing something that's going to contribute to your building year after year? This is, as I say, it's 2 pages at your discretion. There are lots of different ways to structure these 2 pages. So giving you any sort of specific guidance on it would be difficult. The best guidance I can give you is that don't hesitate, I think, to ask your supervisor if they've had students that have been successful before. And if their students have been successful, would they be willing to share their training expectation? Because seeing someone who's done one can help just make you think about different ways to do it. Another strategy that I might suggest is write a couple different versions where you really highlight different things and then have a look, decide which you prefer. Is there a different organization you can try? Because this is a real narrative for the reviewer. I'm going to talk about the research training environment. So I'm going to come back to this question about the difference between training expectations and research training environment. Generally, your research training environment, though, justification will be co-written by your supervisor, and your training expectations would be really written by you entirely. That's like a base sort of comparison, but they will contain different elements. So your training expectation should really be covering your personal, professional, academic, scientific growth, and what your plans are for that. The research training environment is going to focus much more on what resources are available to you. They may be resources that will help you to be to develop professionally, but it's really more about the resources, both financial as well as material that are available to you. I wasn't going to talk more about the social mobilization because we're covering this on Friday at our session. Friday at noon, we're hosting a session specifically on social mobilization, writing this 1 page for your FRQS awards. The reason why we felt that was important is because this is brand new. This section has never been in there before. And truthfully, it's challenging to think about how you will probably use, for instance, UN Sustainable Development Goals. Like this is a big leap, considering many of us maybe have never even heard about UN Sustainable Development Goals before. So we're going to host a session on Friday. If you are in today's session, but you're unable to attend, we'll send you a recording of Friday's session as well, okay? Just so that you can learn what was covered and hear from the experts. We're bringing in 3 or 4, depending on availability, experts, former trainees who've worked in areas of science communication and engagement for a long time. And they're going to share with you some ideas that they have about how they would write this section if they were you today, okay? Ultimately, what they're looking for in this section is for you to write a sort of one page on 3 elements, focused on 3 elements, showing your capacity to be an engaged citizen, your capacity to increase dialogue between science and society, and your thoughtfulness around how your work, your own contributions contribute to UN Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're somebody who has never done anything to increase dialogue between science and society, they're happy for you to pivot a plan for what you would do in your first year of your award to do so. So that's why we can help you build this, because you have the opportunity to still say, I know what I'm going to do, and this is what my plan is going to look like to build a capacity for social mobilization if you'll give me this award. Okay, so we want those to be strong. This criteria, this specific section is worth 15 to 20% of your award for FRQS. So it's definitely not an insignificant section at all. So for the FRQS, these are the other 2 sections that are new. There's the integrated presentation of your journey that everyone will submit, and the pertinent experiences and scientific achievement that only the master's and doctoral students will present. The postdocs don't present that because they've already provided a common CV and explained their common CV. So your integrated presentation of your journey is a 1-page description of your interests, your background, why you're pursuing the program you're pursuing, how it's going to take into account UN Sustainable Development Goals, and a little, 1-pager basically about explaining why here, why this project, why you involved in this project. The pertinent experiences and scientific achievement is 2 pages that basically describes your detailed contributions. So you'll put in this section 2 things. 1, you'll clarify if there are any internships, research experiences that you've had, if they're academic or if they're self-initiated. And the second is to explain your scientific publications, your posters, your presentations, and any factors that have influenced your ability to sort of progress on those. If you can't fill the 2 pages, it's fine. I mean, especially this is a section, there's specific things they want in this section. So don't try to jam in things that don't belong in this section. This is 2 pages for masters and for doctoral candidates, okay? So it may be that a master's candidate will not fill up the 2 pages versus a doctoral candidate who will, okay? But you're in different competitions. You've just got to write what belongs in the section. Yeah, absolutely. And then the justification of the host environment or the research training environment is what I was mentioning. So for the postdocs, you're trying to, in usually quite a short section, you're trying to create an understanding of why you're pursuing this specific lab, what's available to you in terms of space, funding, and equipment. This sometimes is quite a short section. So CIHR, it's only about half a page. You want to think about the resources that are available to you at all levels. So within your lab, within your research program, for instance, or research theme, seminars, opportunities to present, opportunities for exchange, for collaboration. Within your research institute, for instance, even, are there technology platforms that are available to you that will be important for your work? And within your university, so within your academic program. And part of what reviewers are looking for here will also come from a supervisor's common CV. So it's not only informed by what you write in this section, but also looking to your supervisor's common CV to understand whether or not there is a strong, say, amount of funding to support this student, and a strong sort of peer-reviewed history. A question about how you might phrase or write these sections. I think the best advice I have for writing these sections is you want to do something kind of called block writing. So you don't want to write 2 pages, just straight text, no variation, if possible. So this goes back to that editing. You want to create headers. Even if it's in your research project, you want to create headers, things like introduction, if it's methods, objectives, aims, hypothesis, significance of this research project. Don't be shy about putting these like basically road marks in for reviewers. Much easier to read something if you kind of know what is happening in the section below. Same for training expectations. You definitely want to create like road marks, okay? You want to signal to people when you're moving from one idea to another. And so I would always use headings for all of these sections. I would not use bullets. I would write them in an essay format, but I would use headers and that kind of thing to sort of indicate sort of what section I was moving on to. You can use bullets, but you wouldn't answer them entirely in bullets. Okay. So sponsors assessment. I might just have you write this in the chat actually. Tell me a little bit about who you think is the best to complete sponsors assessments. Keeping in mind that sponsors assessments are only going to be required for those that are applying to CIHR competitions. So who needs that? Are you allowed to insert a figure for the research proposal? Yes, I believe so, because most of the time these are uploaded documents. It'll probably tell you specifically, but I believe that's okay. I've definitely seen it before. Current supervisor, absolutely. I didn't actually launch the poll. I was just going to have people write in what they actually thought were the best. Yes, current and past supervisor, absolutely. So those are the two number ones. So what happens if you need 3 reference letters? Yeah, so you can use committee members, great suggestion. So if you've already been a graduate student for a while, you might have committee members who know your work and know you quite well. If you're a master's student coming sort of recently out of undergrad, you may have to ask someone who's supervised, for instance, an honors project for you. Yes, if you have collaborators that are, for instance, more senior than you, that are in an academic position, I think that would be like the main guidance there, is that you're always looking to have somebody who is going to be in an academic position, not in a staff position. For all of your references that need to be provided, you will be provided a scoring sheet, and your referee will be provided a scoring sheet and will be asked to write a justification of their answers. And that's really what reviewers are looking for, is the consistency and like the detail in the justification of the answers, to which they're being asked to describe specific qualities, okay? So approach your references early, make sure that you share, for instance, and remind them of your CV, and remind them of activities that you've collaborated on together, or that they would have seen your sort of qualities in, so that they can also be reminded to include those in their justifications for the referee letter. The last thing I want to cover is I want to quickly go over the evaluation criteria. Sometimes we just don't even look at it. And I think that's actually a pretty common thing. And it's fair maybe, because we're not on that side. It's not as though I have to know what weight to give to something, and it's not my job to evaluate, but it's helpful, I think, to look at the criteria to have a better understanding of how they're being evaluated. So for the Masters Canada Graduate Scholarship, 50% is on your academic excellence. So a lot is on your academic records and transcripts and awards. 30% is your research potential, which touches on your research project, for instance, okay? And 20% is personal characteristics and the interpersonal skills that they are going to draw sort of from past things that you've done. That's your common CV, again, that we're going to see in CIHR that master's students will have provided. For the doctoral Canada Graduate Scholarship, it's a real 50-50. So it's basically 50% on your research ability and potential and 50% on relevant experience and achievements obtained within and beyond academia. So actually within the doctoral competition, there's a lot of leeway for reviewers to kind of take into account that you're like a great candidate by pulling in different things to these two categories, okay? So that's, unfortunately, I think it doesn't help you a lot in terms of strategizing about your application. And for the postdoctoral competition for CIHR, really 60% is on the achievements and activities of the candidate, 20% for your sponsor's letter, and 20% for your research training environment. That's the other thing that will come into play for your graduate scholarships for doctoral is your sponsor's letters, of course, will give information to them about your personal characteristics, as well as about your experience and ability and potential. For the FRQS, again, this has changed a lot this year. About anywhere from 25 to 30% is on your academic record and background. The research proposal is the biggest chunk, so anywhere from 35 to 50%. Your research proposal, but also your sort of research presentation and background. It's only for the postdoc awards where you get the host environment weighted, and the social mobilization section is, again, 15 to 20% of that application. We've included a link here for what's a new guide because of the changes for FRQS, the new evaluation criteria. We're going to also be sending you a document ahead of Friday's session so that you'll understand well what the goal of this social mobilization section is before we meet on Friday. So I said the last thing that we would do is provide a few resources for what you could kind of do next. Some of the sessions here, are happening quite quickly and maybe just around the timing of your awards applications. So again, we'll host a session specifically on the FRQS social mobilization on Friday. Graphos, which is McGill's Writing Center for Graduate Students, is hosting 2 different sessions with different emphasis on fellowship writing, one on September 23rd and one on October 6th. They've got totally different topic and content. So you're welcome to go to their website to see what they're offering and if it might help you. They're really about writing these sections, okay? The Would You Fund It is something offered by Skill Sets, and it allows you to essentially get a consultation on your research project, sort of 1-page or 2-page from a principal investigator who has previously served on a review committee for CIHR or FRQS. So you can also sign up for an individual appointment to have some feedback on your research project statement from McGill Skill Sets. And then I mentioned already road signs, but some general writing tips around your applications. You do want to use an active voice as much as possible, which goes along with not being too wishy-washy. So you want to use like will, can, did, not might, would, could, should type of verbs. You want to keep your sentences on the shorter side. Don't want reviewers getting too lost in long sentences. Again, strong verbs is, the message here about active language. Strong verbs are better than a lot of adjectives. And make sure you check possessives. So if you're using language like this or it's, make sure that it's very clear to the reader, like what that applies to in the sentence before. I know it's a lot of information and I want to stay on time because I know that people have other things happening. This is going to conclude the recorded